Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Liberty Hangout podcast. My name is Justin, and I'm the founder of libertyhangout.org. And tonight, I'm joined by my co-hosts Eric July and Stefan. Unfortunately, tonight, James can't join us. He's away representing Liberty Hangout at an FEE convention this weekend. Now, tonight, we are going to be talking about Economics for Dummies and cover the basics of Austrian economics, as well as some socialist Keynesian fallacies. Before we get started, however, Stefan, since this is your first time on the show, can you introduce yourself to the audience a bit?
My name's Stefan Devon. I'm the vice president with another Liberty Hangout member on the campus at UWF, University of West Florida, for the Young Americans for Liberty. You know, doing our best to spread the message of liberty to college students and, you know, have a good time doing it.
Awesome. How long have you been libertarian for, Stefan?
Not long. Probably, I'd call it maybe a year and a half probably. I was pretty apathetic prior to getting to college, and then showing up here, you know, I just ran into a lot of new viewpoints, and it was really an eye-opener for me.
Awesome. I think we all took similar paths, and we're all pretty young to the movement. You know, Eric used to be a Democratic Obama supporter just a couple years ago. Just a little over a year ago, I was a staunch Bush-supporting neocon. Now, just to get started tonight, I wanted to start off covering the four main principles in microeconomics, since all human action stems from these four truths. They are, number one, people face trade-offs. To obtain one thing, you must give up something else. Number two, the cost of something is what you give up to get it. That's known as the opportunity cost. Number three, rational people think at the margin and will act if the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. And number four, people respond to incentives. And so, stemming from these principles, I think that we can discern two important things here. That mankind is naturally self-interested, and that men seek to improve their living conditions by exerting the least amount of energy possible. Now, for those listening that aren't too familiar with Austrian economics, this is essentially the basic tenet of the philosophy. Now, this doesn't seem like a very difficult concept to grasp, yet a lot of people in this country fail to understand this and instead subscribe to the theory of Keynesian economics. Where do you guys think that they went awry, and how do you think we can get them to see things from our perspective?
Man, that's that's a tough one, man. I mean, the way I look at Keynesianism, man, it's one of those things where it's well, let me put it to you like this. I've heard a lot of even Chicago economists as well as Austrian. Their rebuttal against it is that Keynesianism is more, I guess, empiricism more than anything, and it doesn't take really into account the human aspect and whatnot. And I really don't, you know, more as much as I've studied it, I really don't find that even to be true. I think more so Keynesianism is. And why people are so attracted to it is because it basically legitimizes having some type of central planning, and that is will always forever be attractive to definitely, which is why you see a lot of government employees, you know, I guess the economists, so to speak, they're all Keynesians for the most part. But that's why. It's because it basically legitimizes central planning, which legitimizes government in general. So it tries to make sense out of and Hayek, he did a great job of explaining how basically Keynes himself, what he tried to do, his lifelong work was basically trying to he didn't know much about economics, so he tried to rewrite the subject, you know. So all the basic laws, whether it be from a Chicago's perspective or an Austrian perspective, those basic laws, he seemingly tried to basically say, all right, well, they don't exist, even though, you know, they forever exist, including the four principles that you mentioned. So it's just one of those things where, from an emotional standpoint, Keynesianism, it does legitimize central planning, it does legitimize government in general, which is why it's so attractive.
Right, right. And I know that you just mentioned there a bit earlier how a lot of people look at Austrian economics and they don't see it as consistent with human nature. And now I find that baffling, and now I don't think that there's a term for this, but hopefully one day in hundreds of years when historians are writing about me, I'll be credited with coining this term. I'm going to call it the human nature fallacy. And so I think when we look at those four things and how people are self-interested and they seek to improve their living conditions by exerting the least amount of energy possible, this is why you can't have a monopoly on violence. This is why you can't have Keynesian economics. If you can't trust people to take care of themselves at the individual level, how can you trust them to be able to take care of others? They can't govern themselves. How can they govern others?
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the argument that I always make when talking economics. I mean, it's really hard to, and we've talked about this on air before, how it's very, very difficult to seemingly get guys to realize their violent, I guess, implications. But it's one of those things where if they were consistent, even the Keynesians or the statists, if they were consistent in their ideals that basically man is bad, and there's no way around it. They are self-interested and all of that. I would think that, well, that would give you, I guess, from a reasonable standpoint, you think, well, why would we have this existing monopoly of violence? Because these same bad people, they'll get access to it, and more than us, the same greedy people that they like to talk about, the corporations and yada yada. Those guys are going to be able to easily infiltrate this monopoly on violence. If they're so self-interested, they're going to be able to put people in office that will pass laws that are going to benefit them at the top. Those guys that are already at the top, it's easier for them to do that than somebody like myself or you. So again, it is just one of those things. It just really makes sense to me, or I mean, if you just really break it down from a rational standpoint, if you're going to say that we need government because man is or you think man is bad, then for that same reason you have to reject having some expanded type of government, because again, these same bad people, and they will infiltrate the state, and which is why you've seen so many examples, whether it be with Hitler, Zedong, anybody, all these historical standpoints in which the state was used to annihilate their own people. Again, how you got to take a look at that before you start making silly claims and assuming that, well, man is bad and we have to have a government because of it.
Right, right. And I think it was actually Ludwig von Mises who first theorized that if men are bad, well, therefore government is equally bad and going to be worse, because you are going to be monopolizing that. So if people at the individual level are going to be susceptible to that, then once you give them that monopolization of power, well, it's going to magnify, and they're still going to look to improve their own living conditions in the most expedient way possible. And once they have that monopoly on force, well, guess what? They're going to use force to get what they want. And so I think moving forward, we can say that this is a fallacy, because if man is bad, I mean, I've also heard a lot of people say that as far as economics go, I've heard people say to me that there's an economic incentive to take advantage of people. However, we see in the market that that's not really true. The only people that are taking advantage of others is really the government. Because when it comes to improving your standards in the most expedient way possible, guess what? You're going to get more from others. You get in what you give out. It's a reciprocal effect, really, in the market.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's really. I mean, when we talk about incentives from a business standpoint, again, this is something else we've talked about on air. How government, I mean, because whatever they do for the most part is monopolized, so they have no type of competition. And if they fail, they don't see the same type of consequences as somebody that has a private business would. You know, well, I mean, just think about it. I mean, the government said, you know, well, by the time Obama leaves, it'll be in $20 trillion worth of debt. That is unheard of. From a business standpoint, that business would have been ran to the ground, over and done with, if they were making such irrational choices. But again, because they have a monopoly on violence and they monopolize certain markets, I believe right now you're starting to see with that, obviously with the rise of Bernie Sanders, it looks like for, you know, health care and insurance will be monopolized, or they're looking to try to monopolize. And I'm just trying to let people know that we're going to get crap. If you thought that our healthcare system, which isn't as bad as people like to make it seem, if they think it's crappy now, it's going to be 30 times more crappy. Because again, when the government screws up, it's like, you know, whatever. We could gripe, moan, we can do all of that, but at the end of the day, because there's not any kind of market, and the market really keeps businesses in check. So if you screw up and I say, well, you screwed up, I'm not giving you my money anymore. I'll go to person B or business B, which is providing the same service. And this really forces them to, if they want to make money. And this, Friedman did a great job. Austrians like to crack on Friedman, but Friedman did a great job in explaining how people, like, because they are greedy. Walter Williams does a good job at this as well. But because people are greedy, it's really forcing people to, forcing these businesses to have better products and put better product out, more efficient products at that out in the market. Because the idea is to make money. So if there's a business that is doing something or having the same service provided for more cheaper and more efficiently, people are going to be more attracted to that. So in order to compete, I got to make my business better and much more cheaper. So because they're greedy, and that's because they want money. People aren't making these products because they care about you. I know Walter Williams pointed to like potato farmers back in the Gap and selling these potatoes to New Yorkers that didn't have them. So Walter Williams points out, well, they wasn't giving it providing those potatoes because they cared about the New Yorkers having potatoes. No, they wanted to make a buck.
Right.
So, and because they wanted to make a buck, again, they got their potatoes. I mean, we've seen this thousands, millions of examples of this. So greed is not as bad as people like to make it out to be.
No, I definitely agree with you there. And so I think, a lot of Marxist academia and the humanitarians, they want to paint self-interest and greed as this really evil function of human nature. But as we see, it's self-interest that creates this beautiful, spontaneous order. And now, I know you also just mentioned how with the rise of Bernie Sanders, we're seeing more calls for the state to monopolize certain industries such as healthcare. And now I've been rereading Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. For those of you who have not read it yet, I would definitely check it out. And so there's this one line in his book that really stuck out to me. And so a lot of the socialists and Keynesians will look at things like roads and infrastructure and this and that, police, and they'll say, oh, without the state, that wouldn't be possible. But Hazlitt posits that, hey, this is all coming from taxpayer money. This is all privately, in a way, privately funded. So none of that money that could go to the roads or go to the police or go to the healthcare would have been possible without capitalism in the first place.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually a great. I need to read through that Economics in One Lesson by him again, because that's a great point. I mean, the government provides nothing. I mean, let's
it only redistributes.
Yeah, the government provides absolutely nothing. Let's get that out there. What they do is they do extort, and they hold guns to people's heads, and they say, hey, you give us the money so we can give it back to a private company so they can provide the service. I mean, that's really all that's going on, but they don't provide anything. So everything, and this is Ron Paul does a great job in pointing this out, how socialists, capitalism doesn't need socialism, but socialism needs capitalism and for it to survive, which is why you see socialists feeling like their humanitarian efforts, they have to be forced. Right. Because, again, they wouldn't be able to, they want to force everybody else to do everything, and again, and it's largely because they're going to fail. We've seen some of the most economic disasters come from programs and policies that were geared to quote unquote help people, and they ended up in economic disasters that ended up in people, starving and whatnot. So most definitely they need capitalism comes first, and but the biggest thing about capitalism, and I know it's kind of branches off, but I did do a video not too long ago in explaining how capitalism has become this term that is strawman, I think, more than anything, because most people don't know what it is. And way I like to put it is, no matter, because the word, I guess, capitalism, it did come from a leftist, but you did start to see
I think it was actually Marx himself who coined the term.
One more time?
I think it was actually Marx himself who created the term.
Right. But the reason why you saw a lot of economists, well, they started embracing it and whatnot, but like Austrian and Chicago economists started embracing it. But the thing that I like to point out is that in order for us to have a conversation of substance about whether it be capitalism, socialism, it only makes sense to go off of a definition that the prominent economists, free market, free enterprise economists, advocate for.
Right.
And that only makes sense, because at that point, if you're arguing with a brick wall, and this is what a lot of Keynesians do, a lot of socialists do. They argue with a brick wall. They want to make up their own definition. And there's a definition that absolutely no economist, prominent economist, actually advocates for. Capitalism is, we often define it as basically the private ownership of goods and services and the private and voluntary exchange of those private goods and services. If you want to argue against that, you have to go off of that definition, and that's usually the definition. Walter Williams describes it as along those same lines. Sowell does. He said capitalism isn't an ism. It's basically just people freely doing whatever they want with their goods and services. So it's the same. Rothbard, all of these guys describe it as basically you being able to do what you want with your goods and services. So for me, to be against that, you have to really, you're basically saying, look,
it's an admission that you support theft.
Yeah, off the rip, you kind of have to admit that. But most definitely, I challenge them. I don't think a lot of big economists do this enough to where they kind of make sure we hammer home the definition of what we're advocating for, because if we can cut through that, we debunk probably, I would say, 90% of the Keynesians and the socialist argument by simply saying nobody's advocating for what you're even marching against. This whole resist capitalism and all of this, they're making up a definition that absolutely nobody or very, very few people actually advocate for. So, and it forces us we get in these conversations. I fall into this trap all the time, in which I'm like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And then I got to kind of dial it back and say, wait a minute, nobody's even advocating for that, so that doesn't make any sense. So we gotta get careful and try to gear the conversation and make sure they understand what exactly we're advocating for.
Well, right. I would say that a lot of what happens is that belief for Keynesianism, the belief in the state starts at home. You start with the style of parenting or whatever, then you get into school, state-sponsored school, and you're taught nothing but their version of economics. You never hear anything else. So there's really, you have the outliers. I wasn't one of the outliers. I know I have some friends who in high school, thought it was BS. They were like, they called it out. They didn't agree with it. I was not one of those. I kind of fell into that trap of, I was told by the adults in my life, by my superiors or whoever, that was how things were. So
that's why I think it's an ironic travesty when a lot of liberals and Keynesians like to consider themselves free thinkers, when, as you just alluded to, they're just reciprocating all the material that they were spoon-fed in their Marxist education.
Oh man, and this is the advantage that they have, and because they do control. It's monopolized. The education is monopolized. The Department of Education, we're pumping billions and trillions of dollars in that, and they're telling people what they can and can't teach publicly. So and again, they teach this. They legitimize I would love to pull out some of my whether it be social studies books, my old ones, and I would love to see the nonsense that was in there. I believe
I had to pick it all apart last year when I took history.
Right, you know what I mean? It's crazy. But just not just from an economic standpoint, but just government in general. There's a lot of things that we did not learn. Even from I like to approach race and economics and learning how the government has always orchestrated the demise of the African American in this country from an economic standpoint. Since slavery, legitimately, right from the get-go, they came over here and they implemented slave codes within their government. It wasn't even like a decade before the first slave ship arrived. They knew what they were doing. It was like, man, we got to put this within the state, but the state has always orchestrated that. But this is stuff that you don't learn. And I think if people understood that, they would be more so. They would want to reject the state, resist the state, because again, a lot of the economic nonsense and all of the downfalls of whether it be economies tanking and how the Federal Reserve is manipulating all that. It's the stuff they don't teach you. But again, this is stuff, if you understand that, it's been government this whole time. for the most part, all the errors, or the big time errors, like the bubbles bursting and whatnot, have been orchestrated by the government.
Absolutely. Now, just moving on a bit, I think that one of the most prominent economic fallacies is the broken window fallacy.
Oh,
And
man.
so, in short, Keynesians believe that by going around and breaking windows, they are stimulating economic activities because it creates jobs, since people will now have to replace all those broken windows. But what the Keynesians don't realize is that creating jobs doesn't necessarily mean that you've created wealth. We see all the new jobs that are created for making windows, but what we don't see is all the damaged resources in the economy and how everyone's worse off as a result. And we also don't see all the jobs that would have been created had all those windows not been broken. Do you guys want to weigh on this? As I think, Eric, you have a lot to say about the broken window.
Oh, man, I mean, I feel like every week I'm taking a stab at the broken window. But no, you basically broke it down exactly as I would have. No matter what, I mean, when you're breaking windows, so to speak, you don't know what people are going to use these resources, what people are going to use their money that they use to fix said broken windows, what that was going to go to. So you never, what we don't talk about, and it's the fact that Krugman and these guys have gotten away with having people believe that, because from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Holding it to its logical conclusion, burning down your house should be a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you hold it, if you're consistent, you're basically saying, all right, well, if I go take my trash can and go dump it on the ground, I'm stimulating the economy.
I actually thought of a good example right before we started the show. So let's say you got the New York Knicks roster. Would it then be a good thing if you're an opposing player, or even if you're on the Knicks team? Would it be a good thing for Kristaps Porzingis to go kick Carmelo Anthony in the shin? Hey, you're creating jobs.
You create because that's the train. I guess the trainer has to work on his ankle now in the shin, and work on his ankles and shins because he kicked him. You know what I mean? But in the same respect, now
the winning formula for the team.
Yeah, the best player's gone, so they're taking their season's taken, and they're losing money because nobody. Again, this is stuff that people don't see, and it's such a. I would say that is the easiest, I guess, fallacy to debunk, and I really do not understand how these guys have gotten away with. Krugman especially has gotten away with making people believe that this is really like true. This makes sense.
Right.
And again,
I think the reason that they are able to get away with it, and Hazlitt covers this in his book, is because people are not willing to use their mind to see the unseen. They only see what is seen right in front of them. So this is why taxation is a broken window, because it's being spent on things that people wouldn't have otherwise spent their money on. Because if it was something they valued, then you wouldn't need the force involved. So when the government steals your money to build a road, well, you're seeing the road. And so people are going to say, oh, the government's necessary. It's good. It gives you roads. But what's not being seen is that, hey, maybe that guy was going to use that money to send his kid off to college. Maybe he was going to use it to buy a new suit. You know, we see the immediate economic activity, but we deny and don't realize what is unseen and what is damaged because of this.
Right. I mean, that's point blank. Period. I mean, but they don't think critically, though they like to think they are. These guys, they think they're free thinkers, but they don't think critically in the slightest, because I would say the overwhelming majority of the fallacies that they put. I mean, I look at these like Robert Reich videos, and this guy is, you know, he got his doctorates, and he's supposed to be a lot smarter than people like myself who just get bachelor degrees and whatnot. But it's like, it goes to show how, and Sowell probably of any economist does the best job of saying how these really foolish economists have infiltrated academia. But these guys go make these silly videos in which it's like, you know, he had like the top 3, what he said, economic fallacies, and he's talking about, oh, well, you need to raise the minimum wage to 15 an hour, and that's going to stimulate your economy. Obviously, he never explains how this is going to stimulate the economy, but he says this, and I'm looking at the video, and I'm seeing all the comments, C, and I'm like, have you guys ever just kind of sat back and look, all right, well, let's break this down. Well, we raised the minimum wage to this. All right, what's going to happen on the back end? But they don't ever talk about what's going to happen on the back end, because things such as, it is not, to be fair, it's not just with minimum wage, it's with a lot of fallacies. these things, we don't start thinking critically. There's some things happening on the back end that we're not talking about. But in order for these, I guess, fallacy to hold true, it has to be under the especially minimum wage is basically under the assumption that, okay, the economy as is, like literally as is, everybody's making however much the profit margin, all of this stays the exact same if you raise, let's say, the minimum wage. And we know that never is true. We know the market is going to make their adjustments, whether it be I guess cutting jobs, or whether it be, all right, well, we're gonna we have this product, it was once 15 ounces, well, we're going to knock it down to 12 ounces, and we're going to charge the, the market's going to make its adjustments if you do something such as double the minimum artificial price on labor. So again, we don't talk about what's going to happen on the back end, and a lot of these things that they want to implement, it's under the assumption that the economy and the market is going to stay exactly as is, and we know that never happens.
Right, right. Now, I didn't actually have the minimum wage here on the agenda for tonight. I'm glad you brought it up. Would you be able to delve into that a little further so that we can see how it is detrimental to the economy as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, we know, well, I would hope people that understand economics, even Keynesians, it's funny because they understand this somewhat, that price control has been often a bad thing. And we don't look at minimum wage as a price. That's exactly what it is. It's an artificial price on labor. That's exactly what it is. And it almost, it never works. I believe let me see, I believe has been raised, what, 12 times. I believe 8 or 7 or 8 of those times, like the year after it was job loss if the federal minimum wage was raised. It's a job killer, and it just makes sense from a lot. I don't like breaking it down from an economic standpoint. I just like just using logic. Like if you have a job in which you were getting paid, I guess the minimum wage now is $7.25, and somebody holds a gun to my head and said, well, you can't employ people unless you basically double their wage. So it's under, again, like going back to the same point I just mentioned, it's under the impression that, okay, the market would stay exactly the same and there will be no adjustments on any end. But again, these are things, and they're often so detrimental to the people that they claim to want to help, because they say these low-skilled workers, these people in poverty, are the ones that need these jobs. So again, we set this artificial price on labor, and we start killing. That's what it is. It's a job killer. Minimum wage doesn't grow jobs. It's a blatant job killer. But these guys that are unskilled, they're the first ones that don't make the cut. Because me, if I'm a business owner, if I'm rational and I have to charge or pay you $15 an hour now, which was double what I was paying you before, I'm gonna make my adjustments, obviously from a market standpoint. But now I'm looking at, all right, well, if I gotta charge, I guess $15 an hour. Well, now at this point in time, I'm gonna get somebody that's probably a lot more skilled than the person that held that job before, a lot more efficient. So these guys that are a lot more, I guess, experienced as well. So these are supposed to be jobs, they believe, that would help these people in poverty, people that are low skilled. And if you go look at when it's raised, such as like black unemployment, black teenage unemployment, always goes up every time it is raised, whether it be from the state level, from the local level, it always goes up.
The city of Chicago has one of the highest minimum wages in the country, and they have a youth unemployment rate of 91%.
Again, and it's so obvious, you would think that it's so. But again, if it made sense, because the kind of scaling back on it, but if it made sense, basically you could raise the minimum wage. What they're saying, I guess, is, well, we set this artificial price on labor. They're going to have the same exact buying power, but they're just going to make more money. And if that made sense, I always say, why stop at 15? Raise it to 100, raise it to 2,000, and we'll all be rich. If that's just how it works, just inflate the market with all of this money. And this is just how it's going to work. But again, it never works like that. It never has worked like that, because if it did, And I always go to these countries, whether it be, Australia, that has, if it made sense, that raising the minimum wage, because they have a significantly higher minimum wage than what we have, but their GDP, we crap on them
I'm glad you
GDP.
brought up GDP. I want to talk about that in a bit.
Right, but in terms of GDP per capita, we cream them. Buying power, we cream them. Our poor people in all of these Scandinavian countries with higher minimum wage, our poor people have more buying power than them. So if it made sense, and it's the same thing goes with free education. Their education is free, but again, from an economic standpoint, whether it be GDP, no matter what way you look at it, usually for the most part, we're doing better than them. So
Right.
why are we always, well, that's what Bernie loves to do. Oh, well, look at what these Scandinavian countries are doing, and they're giving people free this and free that, and it's like, okay, but what is that resulting in? Because at the end of the day, again, from well, no matter what way you look at it, GDP, buying power, definitely our poor people are doing better off than they are in those other countries.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that we can rationally deduce that every single state intervention is a broken window. And so whether it comes to public jobs or, like you were just saying, the minimum wage, because that's obviously state intervention into the market, it's all essentially you're destroying resources, you're destroying property. And so what may seem like a net gain for someone, so like when you have the minimum wage instituted, oh, that sounds great. Someone's going to be getting $15 an hour. As someone who used to work in retail, when Governor Christie's raised the minimum wage by $1, it was awesome for me, but wasn't so awesome for my boss, wasn't so awesome for the consumers. And so that leads me into another quote from Henry Hazlitt from his book, in which he says, quote, "No man would want to have his own property destroyed either in war or in peace. What is harmful or disastrous to an individual must be equally harmful or disastrous to the collection of individuals that make up a nation." So while on the surface, some individuals may be getting that net gain from the state intervention, overall we're seeing it's a total net loss, and now this economy is going to have less resources overall, and we're all going to be less well off, we're going to be poorer. And this is why taxation and the government cannot create prosperity. It creates breadlines.
Oh
I
man.
can't put it any simpler than
No,
that.
no, that's about as simple as you're going to be able to put it. I mean, you look at so many of the countries that are worse off. Almost all of them they do not have free enterprise.
Right.
They have government orchestrated economies. They're leaning towards that in some way. And it often ends up in bread lines. That's really what ends up happening. But it's I don't understand how these I guess it's really in academia. I think that's where we're losing this battle, because people are under the impression, I think it's with the humanitarian efforts, or the false, I always call it fake humanitarianism, because that's what it is.
Right.
But they are under the illusion that okay, well, if you don't want this, you don't want the government to implement this law, well, you don't care. In a lot of senses, what I like to put it is, no, it's because I understand. Definitely me growing up poor, I understand what the stranglehold that the state has does not help at
Right.
all. Prosperity is created through free enterprise, having markets. And it's funny because people think that, I don't understand how they really assume that a group of bureaucrats, central planners, can dictate market prices, can dictate what's best off for everybody, more so than what a market filled with millions of people can. It makes, I mean, so, again, I keep referring back to Sowell, but that's what he does. He
Right.
talks about that all the time,
And I
and
think
how,
that raises the question too, because oftentimes a big concern I hear from liberals on social media is that the reason they support the monopolization of healthcare or other industries is that, oh, well, in the market, my voice isn't heard, so we need government. Well, if that's the case, let's say, just for the case of the argument, let's say this is true and that in the market their ideas are not being heard. Why is it going to be any better when you then monopolize this service, where this one monopolized provider is not going to face any economic sanctions from competition?
absolutely, no, it makes no sense. I mean, again, a lot of what we disagree, even when we find a common idea, which is all right, well, this is bad. We take education. I think everybody agrees that our education, when no matter what side you're on, our education could be better. Now, what the Keynesians and the leftists, they think, well, we need to monopolize it, give government more money, tax people more, and that's going to help better our education. I'm like, well, the government already has monopolized it, and you are what you got is what you got. This is what I don't understand. When we talk about the Department of Education, I believe we spend more per pupil than any country.
And isn't it ironic how the cities like Detroit, they spend more per pupil than any other city in America, and they have the most failing schools in America.
Exactly.
So I think we can rationally deduce that when government spends money, the more their spending goes up, it's generally a bad thing.
Right. It's almost always a bad thing. But again, what we disagree is that they seriously believe, all right, well, we just got to get a government just a little more money, and then the problem is going to fix itself. And whether it be from the Austrian standpoint or the Chicago standpoint, you're like, well, the government obviously is doing a bad job now. So how about we just give people back their money and let the markets figure it out? So
actually,
again, that would be more rational. It makes sense to me.
I think, I don't know if it was Detroit or somewhere, I can't actually remember exactly where it was, but somewhere recently it got ruled, I think, by the state that the public schools did not have a requirement to produce quality education. They really had to meet whatever minimum standards. As long as they met those.
That sounds like all 50 states in the U.S.
Let me tell you, my high school that I graduated from, although, some of the teachers there were great and they really cared, but the public school system does not do a lot of people justice.
Right. No, I definitely agree. Just moving on a bit, I also wanted to talk about some economic indicators. And as Eric just mentioned, GDP before. We're often taught to look at GDP and employment rates as a means of judging how well off an economy is. But GDP only takes into account spending, and it leaves productivity off the table. So in essence, if I pay Eric $10 to dig a hole, and then he pays me $10 to fill that hole back in, the GDP will be $20, and we will have a 100% employment rate. Yet neither of us will be any better off than before, and in fact, you could probably argue that we're worse off since we lost the greatest resource of all, our time, in order to gain nothing of value. Now, how prevalent would you guys say this fallacy is in society, and what indicators should we instead be looking at in order to see how well off an economy is?
Well, I mean, with me, the way I like to look at it is buying power. I think that's one of the economic indicators that people should truly pay attention to. Is that so basically, how much or what's the buying power? And I always like to look at, I guess, the poor people and I guess the bottom half from an income standpoint, and how they're able to affect their markets from a buying standpoint, and almost across the board. The countries with freer economies, their buying power is higher. So I think no matter what way, and the indicators that people like to look at are usually emotional. They really have nothing to do with economics. Definitely the leftists, I think they've mastered this. They're talking about they always talk about the uninsured rate in Texas and how it's higher usually than but I mean, it's like what does that mean? What is that? That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. A lot of people in Texas, like myself, I didn't even want health care, so I was part of that number, health insurance, excuse me. So I was part of that number, But again, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything from an economic standpoint. So what is what I say. So, but my buying power is a lot stronger than somebody or a country or in a country that probably is far more educated, quote unquote, than I am through their public school system. So again, I always like to look at buying power. I think that is it's almost no leftist ever talks about it, and I know why. They never talk about buying power because immediately it would not fit the narrative, because then you look at all of these countries that have, we mentioned this earlier, have free this, whether it be health care, higher education. They have all of this free stuff, but their buying power is less than that of somebody that is less educated in a country such as the United States of America. So again, that's something to look at, but I guess you can say it's an economic indicator. But when we compare ourselves to other countries, I think right now the conversation is usually with European countries and Scandinavian countries. and we always look at Scandinavia and how these countries, Denmark and all of these countries, and how they offer this and how they offer that. We need to be mindful of, and they try to always compare, like, oh well, this place has this, and this America that has this, and what we don't look at is the population size of these countries. These countries have, like, the DF Metroplex has more people than what they have, so it will be the equivalent. And if I look at some place like Plano, Texas, or Las Colinas, Irving, which people are very, very, very well off, and that's like me comparing those countries, or I'll compare that city to those countries. I could do that. I mean, from a population standpoint, I could literally do that. And across the board, we would be creaming these countries almost all the way across the board. So it's very, very dangerous when we look at these countries that have that don't have a bigger population than a metroplex in the United States, and we say, well, they're doing this, and we try to compare it to what, a country they have, let's say 5 million people, 3 million people, and we got 320 something million people in our country, and we're trying to make these comparisons. So we have to be very, very careful when we are making these comparisons.
Right. No, I definitely agree there, and I think this just pops in my head. I think that an even better economic indicator than just purchasing power would be how much the government is involved in a geographical location. So we can look at a place like Hong Kong where they have very little government, and guess what? It's not the very little government that arises from the purchasing power. It's the purchasing power that arises from there being very little government.
Oh man, you look at countries. I mean, Hong Kong, Singapore is another one, in which they drug themselves out of poverty. Where you're talking about the over half of the country in poverty at some point, and then freeing up their markets, and now you see that they're doing a lot better than what they were.
We even see this. We even see this here in the United States by having such a diverse array of ideas here. We see states like Texas lead the way, versus states like my own, like New Jersey, which are crumbling to the ground and people are fleeing.
Yeah, California. I mean, it's funny how we got all these folks from California that come down here and try to, like, they go. Thankfully, they go like to Austin, with the liberal Austin. They can go run that to the ground. That's perfectly fine, But they come from
until they run for office there.
Right, well, right. But they come from these states in which you have big government. They're getting taxed out of their pants taxed off, and they come down here and try to implement these, or think that we need to implement these policies. But yeah, you do look at states that are freer, such as Texas, in which we have lax labor laws, gun laws. We don't have income tax, and we're creaming states such as California in almost like every economic category. So this is where people always point to our uninsured rate as if that means anything. Well, people in Texas aren't. Who cares? We're still, we're good. We're well off. We don't care about that. So again, we do need to start looking at, and that's a great point that we should mention, because we are very diverse. So it really isn't fair when you do try to compare countries like in Scandinavian countries to state or the entire country here, when you can you look at somewhere like Texas and New York, which are they're on the opposite ends.
They're like two different countries.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they are. They're really two completely different countries, so to speak. From a population standpoint, you can argue that. But most definitely, it's very dangerous, and we never look at that. So I mean, we never break it down. We don't understand how many people we actually have in this country, and how many different ideas we have floating about from a state level, from a city level, in which it almost makes it completely irrational and very, very inaccurate when we start comparing ourselves to other countries and what they're doing.
Right. I think that another very good economic indicator would be how much debt a nation would be in.
Oh man!
And so even breaking it down to the state level, we see a state like Texas. I believe that for every $2 they send to the federal government, they get $1 back. So you can tell right off the bat that Texas isn't really laced with debt compared to some other states, like I think Louisiana. For every $1 they send out, they get $3 back. So when it comes to talking about things like secession, Texas would be very well off if they seceded because they're giving more than what they receive back. But then states like Louisiana, New Jersey, New York, it would never be able to work because they are so dependent on the federal government. They are so strapped in debt. And so we can see right there that those who are in more debt, a college student who has $200 debt to his name is obviously going to be a lot worse off to someone who graduated with no debt to his name.
I mean, that's pretty fundamental. I mean, it's very, very fundamental. We do need to look at those countries like Denmark, who has, like, I believe it's the highest, I want to say almost in the world,
right.
where they have like the highest debt.
I think percentage wise.
Yeah, so and they're per capita as well. So it's like it's crazy that we don't look at things like that. But again, it goes back to literally what we've been talking about, is that we don't think critically about it, and we don't see things that are happening on the back end when we start talking about these numbers. We look at things from the surface, what this country has, what this country doesn't have. We don't look at other things, and we don't think more critically about it. Definitely when we start making these comparisons.
Absolutely. Now, another big issue that we see today is that the Federal Reserve continues to keep interest rates artificially low. It's been hovering at around 0% since 2007, 2008. And this promotes spending and discourages savings, since you will not be incurring as great of a risk by borrowing money. Now, couple this with the fact that the Federal Reserve incessantly inflates the money supply by printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, and you have a massive expansion of credit that will have catastrophic effects. However, despite this, many still cling to the belief that we need the Federal Reserve, even Chicago economics, we need the Federal Reserve in order to regulate the money supply and set interest rates. How and why do you guys think that the market can do a better job than the state?
Well, I mean, my thing is because they do everything else better than the state. So why not? I mean, this is the only. I mean, I've probably studied more Chicago than Austrian, but this is where I tend to disagree with a lot. But then again, let me touch on this before I get back on the point. A lot of people they make this assumption that a lot of Chicago economists actually were advocating for the use of having a Federal Reserve system, when
right.
Honestly, a lot of their studies and a lot of their documentations were centered around just, I guess, being a realist and, all right, if it's going to exist, if this entity is going to exist, then it must do that. But
right.
when you
I think it was Milton Friedman who was
you asked Sowell, right? If you ask Sowell, should the Federal Reserve exist, he's going to tell you absolutely not. Right. He'll let you know that right off the bat. Though again, a lot of his studies, a lot of his documentations, essays, he talks about, and a lot of people confuse it, and they think that he's advocating for an existence of it. But as far as the money supply, even I've seen a lot of Austrians disagree on that, because you take guys like Rothbard, who obviously believed in abolishing the Federal Reserve system not existing, but he thought that from a market standpoint, he wanted the market to, I guess, set the currency, but where he disagreed with a lot of, with even like Hayek, Mises, he disagreed with, and David Friedman, for example, disagrees with him in this perspective, because he says that a lot of, I guess, the Austrian idea is that, okay, well, we want the market to make its own currency, where Rothbard set itself apart from a lot of these guys. Rothbard says that, all right, well, because money must exist as a commodity, automatically it's going to go to a gold standard because of that. So again, a lot of people, that's where you see a lot of Austrians kind of disagreeing. Some say we want to go back to a gold or silver standard. Some say we do. Some say it's going to be a currency that will be able to be converted to back and forth from gold, mainly because gold is again, it exists as a commodity, and it's had purchasing power unlike anything. It's had purchasing power for 6,000 years. So it's hard to argue against something that's worked for that long. But going back to the point, most definitely, I guess the general idea is that the market will be able to better, I guess, have currency. Right. But it's because, just with anything else, markets do things a lot more efficiently than what some kind of centralized group of bureaucrats do. So I don't think money is any kind of different from something like healthcare, from something like insurance or whatever. The market's almost always going to do it far more efficiently than what the government has done, which our federal government again will be in $20 trillion worth of debt. So I think they're the last people that we need to be trying to do things or the last people we need to be saying, hey, monopolize this. They never get it right.
Right, and I think in addition to that too, as far as the currency goes and the expansion of credit, is that when it comes down to having private banks and private currencies, it's that the market's going to be producing the currency and setting these interest rates. And so when you monopolize this, the effects are going to be profound and it affects the entire country. Whereas if you have Bank X and Bank Y sets their interest rates to the market level, which is obviously probably going to be pretty high because you don't want to incur that greater risk. And then Bank X is going to set their interest rates really low. Well, guess what? The only people that are going to be feeling the effects of those low interest rates is going to be those who put their money with Bank X. Those who put their money with Bank Y, they're going to be doing awesome. Whereas when the government comes in and monopolizes this, the whole country is going to be that Bank X. So because we have those artificially low interest rates, guess what? All of us are going to be screwed.
Absolutely. I think the main thing, and when we talk about the Federal Reserve, I think the most dangerous thing of the Federal Reserve is not just with the interest rates, it's the fact that it allows government to monetize their debt.
Right.
I think that's probably the most dangerous thing that they're able to do, and that's something, again, that a lot of us, private businesses and whether it be private banks, they would not be able to do that. So because it allows them to, that's how they basically monetize their debt. They create money out of thin air, and they screw up almost time and time again. They screw up the markets because of this. They've created almost every depression because they
Whoa! You said almost. I think that we can.
I try to be lenient when I say things. Yeah, I want to be like, yeah, they have created every depression, but I try to give them a little leeway. But yes, I mean to be completely honest, yes, the Federal Reserve has created every single depression. But
even going back to the 1800s, when we see the depressions that Grover Cleveland faced, that wasn't because of a central bank. That was because of government spending. Same thing as today.
Same thing as today, and a lot of things that we cry about, we refer to as, such as the Great Depression. They did a great job, not historians, but I think economists probably more than anything, did a great job in twisting the Great Depression and saying that,
government spending got us out of it.
Yeah, and that's complete, or saying that the market was what got us into the Great Depression. That's completely false when you look at the fact that there was a depression, I believe like a decade before.
That ended within a year.
Yeah, it ended within a year.
Year and a half. Was 10 times worse than the Great Depression.
Exactly, but it's because the government basically did nothing. Because they did.
I think it was Harding who was president at the time, and he massively cut spending and let the market do its magic.
Right.
Versus when Hoover was president for the onslaught of the actual Great Depression. Guess what? He increased government spending. He instituted price floors so that, when a depression happens and the market corrects itself, you are supposed to go through a period of deflation where prices drop. But Hoover put in these price floors so that the prices couldn't drop. So, yeah, Keynesians, tell me more how it was in the market that failed.
Right. No, they've done a great job with this, man, and how they've said time and time again, every pretty much economic, downfall that we've had is always pointing towards the market, and the market did this. Oh, what about the market? And it's, to me, it's so frustrating because I wish they held their government to the same standard. Because don't get me wrong, the market is not perfect, and no Austrian or Chicago economist actually believes that it is perfect. It's not perfect. Things happen that are very, very that are unfortunate, maybe to a certain demographic or anything of that sort. But the idea that they always, like Keynesians and leftists always point, well, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, well, why don't you hold your government, or governments in general, why don't you hold them to the same standard? What about the USSR? What about, Red China? What about all of these big government, situations in which it led to, again, famines and
Went
starving
water crisis going on right now.
Right. You know, why don't we hold them to the same standard rather than saying, oh well, a small group of people were affected I guess they're under the idea that it was affected by the free market and the government had. I'm like, well, wait, why don't you hold the government to the same standard? Because again, there's going to be far more examples of government directly starving, killing their own people than you find examples of free enterprise doing the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. I just had a go ahead, Stefan.
I was gonna say it's the same thing. Going back when you Eric, you said like we want to go open your old textbook and see what they said about how they twisted history. It's just that's all people know. The government control and stuff. That's
Right.
what, like for me, I think back, I don't remember a time when I ever had, there wasn't like a big issue going on where people weren't looking to the government for a solution to something. So it's kind of a foreign concept to a lot of people to tell them the market can provide for that, or a private institution can clean water better than whatever is going on in Flint right now, and it's honestly just doesn't occur to people. It really.
Right. I think we can even draw a comparison to say that this is why a lot of owners in the NFL won't hold Roger Goodell to a high standard, because they realize that their livelihood is dependent on him being in power there. And
Absolutely.
so, just before we wrapped up here, guys, so tonight we covered the fallacy of human nature, the broken window fallacy, the GDP fallacy, as well as the Federal Reserve fallacy. Now, one of these fallacies alone is enough to cripple an economy, but in the United States, all of these fallacies have coalesced to create so many bubbles that would have never existed in a free market and that must necessarily pop. Just how bad do you guys think that this economy really is, and how hard is it all going to come crashing down?
Oh man, I mean I wish I could answer that, but it's this is what I will say. I think that the U.S. is in a great situation. A lot of countries aren't, to be fair, in which they could not like basically pull the plug on their government. Definitely when we talk about from a currency standpoint, and be okay. But we are in a very, very, very unique situation in the way that it's two different indicators in which you can point to that. Obviously, we have the biggest, I believe, gold reserves in the world, but more importantly, I believe half, it's like 45% or half of all the global payments are done in U.S. dollars.
Right.
So that is a great situation to be in. Mainly because, again, if we do pull a plug, let's say, on the Federal Reserve, and we are in a very, very unique situation as to we can be like, well, basically, hey, we're going to pull the plug. Y'all got to make y'all's adjustments because, again, 50% of the global payments are being done in U.S. dollars. So it really forces the world. We are in a very, very unique situation where we are able to force really the world to make their adjustments. So obviously, I believe the earlier we do this and the more we start waking people up, the
quicker the market can correct itself.
Yes, exactly. But the more we keep holding it soft, the more we keep allowing government to, I guess, not just monopolize, but basically create money out of thin air and monetize their debt. But the quicker we are able to basically pull the plug on that, yes, there will be, but again, there's no moral high ground, or really I take it back. The moral high ground is to pull the plug, because the more we keep, I guess, putting this stuff off, when it does come down, the worse it's gonna be.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the moral high ground, honestly, is to say, look, let's pull the plug. Let's let the market do what it's gonna do. But it might, it may or may not. Honestly, nobody can truly say that we will experience some type of, I guess, downfall in some way, shape, or form. However, the quicker we are able to do that, the better off we're going to be. So the moral high ground is to not, again, that's what they do with the Depression. They did with the Depression and FDR, and constantly putting it off, basically extending it. Rather, the quicker we pull the plug on a lot of these situations, the better off we're going to be. So I honestly can't say how really bad we are, considering that we are in a great situation.
Yeah. I think that we can see even recently when the Federal Reserve just a month ago they raised interest rates 0.25%, and then in the ensuing week the stock markets lost over 1,500 points. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's tumbling that quickly, that much from just a 0.25% increase in interest rates, how much more are we going to be in turmoil when they raise it to the market level? I think we also have to realize that, we're advocating for a market correction, but what's going to happen in actuality is that the market is going to attempt to correct itself, and you're going to have that depression, but at the same time, just like Hoover and just like FDR, the government is going to step in, and they're going to try to be the Lord and Savior, and then that's what's going to make a coming depression that much more great.
Yeah, that's much more great and worse, you know. So again, I mean, we just have to, we got to pull the plug, and I think this kind of goes to where you and I, we probably agree more than I think you and James from a practical standpoint. We are probably like, you know, we're right there with each other in that a lot of us were educated by people, and this is where ANCAPs, not just ANCAPs, libertarian elitists, they get it wrong. In my honest opinion, because they are so much purist, in which they think that, okay, well, we just, you know, pull the plug, don't participate in the political process to educate people, and they think that's a winning strategy when it's proven to be the complete opposite. You can see, I believe, you see that most young people our age, they lean left. And it's not getting any better because, again, the education is monopolized. So if the government wants to keep making them believe, making our kids believe that, hey, you know, you need the government to exist in order to be well off, they're going to keep pumping this information into our youngsters' head, which is why you should have a bunch of left-leaning, big government statists that are young. So we're not winning that battle. It's not a winning strategy at all. I do believe that we need to be educating these guys in every way we can. Most of us were educated by people that participated in the political process. I was not educated by an ANCAP at all. You know, I always point to Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell that got me to realize what it was. They are not. Walter Williams is a libertarian, but they're not ANCAPs. You know, hell, Rothbard was not. I mean, he believed in participating in political action. And also, Rothbard was an educator. You know, I believe he taught at UNLV.
I think that a great example for why we as libertarians and ANCAPs should be active politically is we can look to examples in history, like in Germany after World War I. You know, Germany, they had massive amounts of debt to the West, and then you saw that their economy collapsed, and look what happened. Their government grew tenfold, and they got Adolf Hitler into office. So at the end of the day, we in the United States, we need a market correction, and at the same time, we know that government is not yet going to go away. So if you can have the option to have a Rand Paul in office who is going to let the market correct itself versus a Bernie Sanders who's going to turn into Magic Wheelchair Man FDR, I mean, it's a no-brainer. You want a guy that's going to let the market correct itself. Otherwise, when that collapse does happen, I mean, there's a lot of purist ANCAPs who believe the government will just disappear when you get this economic crash. But no, if we look at history, you can get an Adolf Hitler if you're not active in the political process.
Well, I like that parallel a lot because right after World War I, in order for Europe to fully recover, they would have had to have a healthy Germany and a healthy France, two of the biggest ones. And when France and other people got together, they laid all the blame at the feet of Germany, and Germany had the highest inflation the world's ever seen because they couldn't actually pay for anything, and thereby creating that first set of the Depression before the 20s. The state's involvement in the war, which caused all the devastation in the first place, but second in that engaging
I thought it provided jobs.
According to Krugman.
Yeah.
but yeah, the involvement later, the vindictiveness of those world leaders at the time are what caused these such a wide range of issues. And right now we're not looking at quite the same level. Like, I hope we're not looking at a world war right now, but the parallel does make a lot of damn sense because putting someone in office who's going to try and affect things as much as possible can only lead to more problems.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we should not discount using the political process as ANCAPs. Anyway, I want to thank you gentlemen so much for joining us tonight. It was a real pleasure. I thought this was a really fun and intellectual show, getting to the heart of economics.
Yeah, thank you so much, man.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys so much for tuning into the Liberty Hangout podcast. We didn't want to schedule a show for next Sunday since the Super Bowl will be on. Let's go Panthers. So make sure to tune into the Liberty Hangout podcast again next Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will likely be joined by Adam Kokesh to chat about his 2020 presidential campaign. Make sure you subscribe to the Liberty Hangout podcast on iTunes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and make sure to check out libertyhangout.org to read some awesome Liberty-minded material from a great lineup of writers. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you again next time.